It was the kind of night no one wanted to be out in. Snow fell heavy across the small, forgotten town, winds howling like wolves against boarded windows. Streets were empty, cars buried under white sheets of ice, and the world seemed swallowed by silence. On the edge of town, a modest little home still glowed with warm light. Inside, a black woman named Grace sat beside her fireplace, clutching her shawl tightly, listening to the storm batter the walls. Life hadn't been easy for her widowed young, working 2 jobs, still trying to keep the house her late husband built with his own hands. Then out of the darkness, headlights cut through the snow, a truck struggling, swerving, and finally, grinding to a stop outside her house. Grace rose, unsure whether to open the door, but when she did, she found a shivering family, an exhausted man, his wife, and 2 children huddled in thin jackets. Their faces were pale from the cold, lips trembling, eyes filled with silent desperation. They had nowhere else to go. Their truck was out of fuel, the storm too cruel to survive, and Grace without hesitation welcomed them in, wrapped them in blankets, gave them soup from her own pot. She never asked who they were, never questioned their story. All she saw was a family in need. What she didn't know was that this act of kindness would not just save lives that night, it would ignite a chain of events that would shake the entire town and leave people whispering her name for years to come. The storm outside was only the beginning. When the sun finally rose, the storm had left the world blanketed in white silence. Grace stepped outside to see their truck half buried in snow, its engine cold and useless. The man thanked her with tired eyes, promising he would repay her kindness. Grace simply smiled, brushing it off. She handed the children bread and warm tea before they left, their tiny boots crunching against ice as they made their way back to the road. She watched them disappear, never asking questions. But the moment lingered with her, a strange heaviness pressing on her chest. Days past, life returned to normal, or so she thought. Grace went back to her long shifts at the diner, wiping down tables while customers ignored her, pretending not to see her exhaustion. She endured the whispers of neighbors who looked down on her, as if kindness made her weak. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the snowy hills, she heard something in the distance. At first it was faint, a rumble, low and steady, then louder, stronger, until the air itself seemed to shake. Engines, dozens of them. Grace froze on her porch as the sound grew nearer, the growl of motorcycles echoing through the town. Windows lit up as curious neighbors peeked out, confusion spreading like wildfire. And then they arrived, one by one, roaring down the street, massive bikes gleaming under fading sunlight, leather jackets, heavy boots, faces hardened by the road, dozens of Hell's Angels rolling into the quiet neighborhood. And at the front of them all was the man she had sheltered. But this time, he was no shivering stranger. This time, he came as someone else entirely. Grace's life was about to change forever. The townspeople watched in terror as the roar of engines shook their quiet street. Mothers pulled children inside, blinds snapped shut, and whispers filled the air. For years, stories of the Hell's Angels had spread like legends, fearsome bikers, outlaws, men you never crossed. Yet here they were, not to cause chaos, but to stop at Grace's little home. The man she had sheltered dismounted his bike, no longer in tattered clothes, but in a leather cut patched with emblems. His wife and children were safe behind him, now surrounded by brothers who looked at Grace with something strange in their eyes, not hostility, but respect. The man introduced himself, not with words Grace could hear, but with actions. He handed her a heavy envelope, sealed its weight undeniable. Then he nodded to his brothers, and in unison, they revved their engines. Saluting her in thunder, Grace stood frozen, her heart pounding, as neighbors stared wide-eyed from behind curtains. She had no idea what she had done, or why these feared men would show her reverence, but she would soon learn that her single act of compassion opening her door on that stormy night had reached further than she could ever imagine, because in their world, loyalty was sacred, debt was eternal, and Grace had unknowingly become family, and family to them meant everything in the days that followed. The town couldn't stop talking. Everywhere Grace went, people whispered. The same neighbors who once ignored her now stared, half curious, half afraid. At the diner, customers who used to treat her like she was invisible suddenly tipped double, but with the whispers came suspicion. The sheriff himself paid her a visit, questioning why bikers were seen at her home. He warned her that men like that brought nothing but trouble. Grace listened quietly, never defending herself, never revealing the truth. Behind closed doors, though, she finally opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of bills, more money than she had ever held in her life. Enough to pay off debts, fix the roof, and breathe for the first time in years. Her hands trembled as she realized the weight of what they had given her. Yet it wasn't the money that changed her. It was the sense of being seen, of her kindness mattering in a world that so often overlooked her. The bikers had vanished as quickly as they had arrived, but their presence lingered like a shadow over the town. Everyone knew Grace's name now. Everyone wondered what power she held to command such loyalty. But Grace herself remained humble. She carried on with her life, serving coffee, working long shifts, smiling when no one expected her to. Still, deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning, because when the angels give respect, they never take it back. Weeks later, trouble finally came knocking. A group of out-of-town men stormed the diner late one night, loud, drunk, and mean. They mocked Grace, sneered at her skin, and made threats under the dim lights of the nearly empty restaurant. Grace stayed calm, as she always did. But the fear in her co-workers' eyes told her this was different. These men weren't going to leave quietly. And then outside, the familiar rumble of engines filled the night. The bikers returned, not just one or two, but dozens. They poured into the parking lot, their presence undeniable, their silence louder than any threat. The drunken men froze when they saw them, their bravado crumbling into fear. The angels didn't raise fists. They didn't need to. With one look, the intruders scrambled, rushing out the back door like cowards chased by ghosts. Grace stood in shock, her heart racing, as the leader stepped forward again. No words were spoken. Just a simple nod, a silent promise. You are one of us now. No one touches you. From that night forward, the town understood Grace was no longer just a widowed woman struggling to survive. She was under the protection of men who lived and died by loyalty, and in their eyes, she had earned it. Seasons changed, but the memory of that winter night never faded. Grace lived quietly, but her story spread far beyond the town. People whispered of the black woman who had sheltered an outlaw's family and won the loyalty of men feared across the nation. Her diner flourished not because of fear, but because respect drew people in. Travelers stopped by just to see the woman they had heard about. Some came curious, others came grateful, but Grace herself remained the same, humble, kind, and unshaken. She never asked for protection, never sought wealth, never used her connection for power. She simply lived as she always had, with compassion, with strength, with quiet dignity. Yet the rumble of engines was never far. On birthdays, on holidays, even on the anniversary of her husband's death, the bikes would arrive. They never stayed long, but their presence said everything. She was family, and she would never stand alone again. And so what began as one stormy night of kindness grew into a legacy, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of humanity can echo in ways no one expects. For Grace, it was never about the bikers. It was about doing what was right when no one else would. But for the Hells Angels, it was about a debt that could never be repaid. And in the quiet hum of her little town, the sound of engines always promised one thing: Grace would be remembered forever.